Okay, go ahead and jump back to your folder where we have our steps for the assets module. And we're going to open up step 12, which is managed file display. Go ahead and copy the entire code and paste it over the code that's currently in your assets.module file and save it. In this step, we're going to be recreating the thumbnail page from our previous example, but this time using managed files. So the first step is to add an entry to the menu registry. So I'm going to scroll up to the top and take a look at our assets menu function. We've added this item here at assets/managed/view. We've given it a title and a description, and the page callback is assets display managed files page. So we're going to go ahead and scroll down and take a look at this function, which is responsible for displaying our page. It's down near the bottom. I'm going to scroll up just a little bit, and here we go. We begin with an empty string for the output, and we're setting the directory to public assets managed. Now, if you're following along and you didn't clean up the unmanaged files, that's okay. We'll have a separate folder for this. The other one was unmanaged. This one will be called managed. And we've created a utility function to create the list of files because we're going to use this again in our next steps. So we've taken out the logic and put it down here in this function called assets load managed files. So what we're doing to begin with is we're creating a new object called entityfieldquery. Now in Drupal 7, there are many objects that share the entity status, including files and users and nodes. And so these all sort of stem in functionality from the top down. And if we look at some of the base functionality for all of the entities, one of the things that we can do is query the entity database for particular parameters. And we can do that using the entityfieldquery class, which belongs to all entities. If you've watched any of the database API videos, then the structure should look pretty familiar to you. So we're setting the result variable to the return value from this query, which is the class that we just created, the instance of the class entityfieldquery. We're adding an entity condition, which is saying that we want to check for this value in this particular column. And we're looking for the entity type, and we want to make sure that that equals file. We don't want nodes, we don't want users, we just want files. We're going to add a property condition, which will allow us to check a particular property of this entity. We're checking the URI, and we're checking that it starts with this value here. So this is kind of read a little bit differently. We're checking this column to see if it starts with public assets managed. And then we're going to go ahead and execute the query and return any values from this result. If there are values, then the result will be an array that contains the items that matched this query. So we're going to check first to see if there are any items by using the PHP count function. If it's bigger than 0, we have some items, and we're going to go ahead and loop through them all and build an array of file IDs. We can then pass these file IDs to the function fileLoadMultiple, which will allow us to load a number of files according to their FIDs and return them as objects. If we don't have any here, we're just going to return an empty array. Okay, now let's go back to our page. We stopped here, which is where we started looking at the assets load managed files function. And now we have a list of file objects, and so we're going to loop through each one and create our output. And this looks exactly the same as our previous example when we were working with unmanaged files. You see we're pulling the URI here from the file and passing it to the image style theme function. And we're using file create URL against that URI to create the link to view the full-size image. So you see here that this is kind of a more natural way to use file objects than with unmanaged files, where we had to do some forcing in order to load the files. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at this in action. We're going to jump to the browser, and we need to flush our caches to add our new page. Okay, it should show up here under Managed Files Thumbnails. And if you look at the address, we have assets/managed/view. And here's all of our images. So these are all managed, which means that when we go to do the additional functions that we added to our previous examples, including the deletion function and the delete all function, that we'll need to take into account the database. And so we'll use a few different functions to do that. Let's just click these links here and make sure this is working. Looks good? Okay. Let's go ahead and move on.